Well, I had a question come up after my last video on this Project 6 and Project 7 from the electronic projects for musicians, and basically the question has to do with when you're using an op amp. A lot of the designs in Craig Anderton's books, they all use a bipolar power supply, where I've got my inverting, non-inverting inputs there, and he has a positive power supply and a negative power supply, and these are about 12 volts DC, which is great if you have a power supply that can do that, but more often than not I deal with things like this, 9-volt battery. Now, yeah, I could use two 9-volt batteries and, have a +9 and a -9, but I don't like to use batteries, first of all. So, most of the time I'm using just your typical wall wart kind of supply. So there is a way that we can use an op amp, the exact same guy here, and use a single positive power supply and take this to ground instead of a negative power supply. So this is the way I draw ground, just a simple triangle. You guys may be more familiar with that symbol for ground, or the chassis or earth ground symbol, the pitchfork. But anyway, this is easier for me to draw, so that's why I use that. So let me get a new page here. So if I've got your typical inverting op amp, that's some resistance there. That's the negative feedback loop. The gain winds up being the ratio of these two values. So if R2 is twice the value of R1, I get an amplification factor of 2. Now then, so that's in, that's out. What I can do here is in the dual-sided power supply, you would normally take this positive side to ground, and you've got the positive and negative rails there powering that, so any signal that's coming in here is going positive and negative with respect to ground. When you're using the one-sided power supply, you don't really have that option. Well, I guess you could, but you would lose half your signal. So what I do is I redefine this as a bias point, and I set that based on the positive power supply, and then I will use two identical resistors. So positive, resistor, resistor, ground. And this point right here in the middle, that becomes this bias point or virtual ground, and all of the circuits that I play with, like these, that I convert and munge together. You see the darkened triangle there, that's my virtual ground or my bias point. And here on my output volume pot, that actually goes to ground itself. because that's what a guitar effect or a guitar amp is going to expect. The very important thing to remember is when you set this guy to a virtual ground or that bias, your signal coming out of the output of the op amp is going to be, at least that value, and then it's going to have your signal rippling on top. So in order to get your signal back and get rid of that slightly bumped up virtual ground out of there, that's when you throw in a simple capacitor. And all the capacitor does is just block the DC voltage, and you get your AC signal back. So that's it. Quick and dirty, that's how to get an op amp from using this bipolar power supply, converting it over to a single-sided power supply, which is a little bit more handy. Setting your bias point with a couple of resistors, usually about 100K, sometimes 10K, sometimes as much as 250K. Don't want to go too low with these because you're going to wind up pulling a whole lot of current through here, and you're not going to have enough to drive the rest of the circuit. So that's the reason why I use those values there. All right, hope this helps you guys out and makes some of your own electronics tinkering a little bit easier. All right, catch you guys next, because now I've got to redo this. So, but that's another story. All right, thanks guys.